Well, you can look around at the crowd, and I'm really glad that you're all here. We put out every chair that we have, and I'm sure you, like me, cannot help but wonder, where is everyone? And maybe that's kind of what water and sewer is like. It's just not, it's invisible to us most of the time. And if this were, say, some, hard noise law, this room would have been packed, right? Remember that one? More dramatic. Or a detour down Montgomery Street. I mean, that has generated more energy and intensity in this village, certainly than this project. Even chickens, right?
So don't worry, don't be here with pitchforks when something happens.
And yet, this is literally the most important thing, I think. It really is. So thank you for being here. I'm Mayor Joel Griffith. It is my pleasure, as always, to welcome you to the historic Wastewater Hall. We have two special guests tonight, and I would like you to please help me welcome them. From the engineering firm, Ty & Bond, Aaron Moore is here. There's Aaron. And the executive director of the Dutchess County Water and Wastewater Authority, Bridget Barclay. So first, let me just explain the format. I have a few things to say, and then I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and then it'll get turned over to Bridget, and I'm going to ask that you can just listen carefully. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, but if you can hold them till the end and let these two women get through their presentations, we'll have a lot of time to talk, okay? If there's something absolutely burning, you think you're going to forget it, put your hand up and we'll try and squeeze you in. But I think they're going to be very thorough, and they're likely to answer a question that you may be thinking about. So we'll try and get through that, and then we'll have our conversation. Can I put this down a little bit? Is that going to be a problem? Can I just close that? How's that? Okay. That's better. Tonight we are gathered for the beginning of a very important conversation. What is the state and what will be the fate of Tivoli's water and sewer systems? The community conversation begins this evening, but it will certainly continue after tonight. This is just the beginning, and we will be talking for many weeks, I'm sure. I want to emphasize as well that no decisions are being made tonight. Tonight is about information. It's about absorbing and understanding the information. Just digesting the facts will be plenty for this evening, I assure you, and deciding what to do about them will come later and in good time. So to begin this conversation, I would like to tell you a few things that you already know, because there's nothing better than the mayor telling you stuff you already know, and then a little history of how we got to tonight. We all know the long looming problem of water and sewer in Tivoli. We've been living with that gloom for years. We understand that well-maintained, well-operated water and wastewater systems are critical to the health, safety, and future of our village. They are more than critical. This infrastructure is essential. Good water comes out your tap, bad things go way down the toilet, and when either of those things don't happen, it's a real problem. And let's not forget that the water system is not just for drinking, it's also for fire protection. That is not something we think about often, but let me tell you, the Tivoli Fire Department does. And these old mains, these old hydrants, and that old water tower are also supposed to protect our lives and property when there is fire. This is a densely built wooden village. And adequate fire protection is just as important as clean and dependable drinking water, though we use one every day, hopefully, and the other hopefully never. We all know that our systems date back to the late 1930s and that many parts of our systems are 50, 60, and 80 years old. We all know that for many years we in Tivoli have experienced more broken water mains than we would like to count or recall. We all also know that across this state and nation, the reality of long-deferred maintenance of essential infrastructure is challenging communities large and small. You can just look to the headlines and hear about communities who haven't faced these challenges and where they've ended up and the trouble they've gotten in. We all know that Tivoli needs to face these issues. What is the condition of Tivoli's water and sewer systems? What must be done to fix them? How much will it cost? How will these repairs be made and financed? That concludes my telling you things that you already know. The next thing, which you should all know, if you don't, you should, and if you haven't thought about it in a while, let's stop right now and acknowledge that Tivoli's water and sewer systems are functioning despite their age, largely due to the tireless effort and incomparable dedication of Superintendent James Simmons and the Village of Tivoli DPW. Thank you, Jim. These ancient and bandaged systems still perform, thanks to their tireless commitment, and I'm glad we can all remember that. The conversation we will have tonight began almost 3 years ago. It was 3 years ago this very week. It's kind of amazing. Even 3 years ago, the Village Board of Trustees knew that we had to face the looming water and sewer problem, and on May 21st, 2014, under the leadership of my predecessor, Mayor Brian Crana, the Village Board of Trustees resolved to apply for a Dutchess County grant to evaluate the potential transfer of ownership of the village's water and wastewater systems to the Dutchess County Water and Wastewater Authority. That transfer evaluation would also require a comprehensive evaluation of the physical condition of both systems. And I know we had a conversation at the time that whoever would end up actually owning the systems, that physical evaluation was absolutely necessary and would be invaluable. So we proceeded with the grant application. Knowing what is actually wrong is the first step in fixing it. We knew things were old and bad, but at no time before now has Tivoli had the details and a comprehensive analysis. So Tivoli was awarded that grant from Dutchess County. Thank you, Dutchess County. $80,000. And we issued an RFP, a request for proposals. About a dozen engineering firms sent in proposals, and after a rigorous process, the Village Board of Trustees chose who we thought to be the very best firm in the field. That was Ty & Bond. Their evaluation began in September 2015. A year and a half later, after looking at every main, manhole, hydrant, well, the tower, and the treatment plant, they produced these massive reports, which I pulled these out of the state of the village, and here they are again. This is what we got. This is what you get for $80,000, and there's actually a little bit more, but yeah. So it's a lot of information in here. Aaron, I want to say on behalf of the Village Board how tremendous it's been to work with you and Ty & Bond. We are thrilled with the depth and detail and accuracy of these reports, and we have no regrets about selecting Ty & Bond, so thank you very much. In addition to the physical evaluation, during these 18 months, legal and financial analyses were conducted. What is the fiscal condition of our systems? What are the fund balances? Is there debt? What are the expenses and revenue requirements needed to properly operate and maintain a water system and a sewer system? Lastly, there is a third report. It doesn't make the same noise when I drop it on the table, but it's about 13 dense pages. This is the transfer feasibility report produced by Dutchess County Water and Wastewater Authority based on the findings in the physical and fiscal evaluation. This report outlines what would happen if the Village of Tivoli chose to transfer ownership. There are complexities and nuances even if we do want to transfer them. It is not a simple matter for reasons that we will hear about later this evening. It is important to clearly understand what the DCWWA is, why it exists, who created it and why, and how could they possibly help Tivoli. And Bridget will explain all that a little later. Tivoli, we have known for a long time that the reality check was coming. These systems are old, and we have known for a long time that the check was coming. This will be expensive. Your village government began to ask for those checks 3 years ago, and now we've got them. We can look them in the face. We have the facts and the figures, and beyond them, a way out from under that long looming water and sewer problem. So even though there's a lot of heavy news tonight, this is a good thing. And I want everyone to understand that. So tonight, let's listen, let's think, and let's begin to talk about where we are, where we can go from here, because I hope you will all agree that we can't put this off any longer. I think we all understand that. So I would once again thank you all for coming, for caring about your water and sewer. And I'd now like to ask Erin Moore to come up, and I yield the floor to her.
Thank you, Joel. So, how are we doing? Good? As Joel said, I'm Erin Moore. I'm from Time Bond. Time Bond was founded in 1911, and we started doing water. We've continued to this day to be a full-service engineering firm, but the vast majority of our work is water and wastewater. And so, personally and firm-wide, that is our passion and our credibility and credentials for looking at this project. I personally have had the opportunity to evaluate many water and wastewater systems throughout the Hudson Valley. We've done a lot of work like this in Beacon and Fishkill, in Hyde Park, and our most recent evaluation like this is Tivoli. I personally and the rest of my company could not thank Joel, the Board of Trustees, and especially Jim so much. There is some times where you are not welcomed with open arms, because our main goal here is just to take the temperature, see where things stand, what is got years of life left, and what you should be looking to replace. Having a village that was so accommodating and working tirelessly to make sure we got the data we needed was really important, and made sure we got a great quality product. So I can thank especially Jim so much, and the rest of the village for making sure we got the data we needed to do the good job. Hopefully we all, that Joel gave us very high praise for. So moving on, what I'm going to be, my position with the project was the project manager, and did the oversight of the evaluations, as well as looking at the process evaluations for water and wastewater itself. So I think this should work okay. I don't mean to be rudimentary, but I'm going to start at the basics. Joel did cover it with a water and wastewater system. So our water system is shown in blue. You have well fields, a water tower, and then a water main that distributes clean drinking water to all the businesses and properties, residential service connections in the area. And then shown in red is wastewater lines. And they take your effluent and they take them to a treatment plant, and also in the system you do have a pump station. And those are the two parts of the water and wastewater system in the village. Whoops, I jumped a little far, sorry about that. I'm sure you're all familiar, yeah, but isn't, I just don't want to get distracted. There we go. You're all familiar with your water tower and where that's located within the village. And I imagine everyone has looked up and seen the McKnight well house off of Broadway. It sort of sits up the hill. And then right by Tivoli Gardens, also off of Broadway, is your wastewater pump station that's shown, that's got the green door there. And what you might not have seen before, and this is shown from aerial view, is your wastewater treatment plant, and that is off of Montgomery Street, but it's got quite a lengthy driveway. So I don't think you can see that from the street itself that easily. So there was 4 things we were trying to accomplish. The first thing is develop a complete understanding of the system, and then identify what is needed. What are the needed improvements? Categorize those improvements. Are they, we looked at everything. So even if Jim had just installed a new piece of equipment, if it had only a 10-year lifespan, we noted in 10 years, you're going to need to replace this equipment. The goal isn't to just make a laundry list of things to do. It's also to develop a tool for budgeting into the future, so you can start looking forward and saying, okay, in 10 years, we're going to need to replace this. We understand that's going to be a future capital need. So the goal is really to do a capital improvements plan, not a laundry list of what's wrong. That's not the intent here. Once we develop that capital, prioritize each of the improvements, then there's an estimate of that improvement cost. And that pretty much is the process I'm going to be describing as we go through here. So the facility site visits were completed on September 14th, and they included looking at generally the civil site. So what's the driveway like? Is there a fence? Is there not a fence? Is there lighting? Safety. If there is certainly anything unsafe or definitely OSHA uncompliant, we noted that. Process equipment, so that's your valves and piping and wells and well pumps and what is the status of the equipment itself. Buildings and structures. And then of course, HVAC, electrical, looked at all of the process systems that keep the things running. So you can see a bunch of our engineers in these pictures looking around, and I even think Jim sneaks into a picture there. These are how we categorize the different improvements that we saw. Immediate, generally related to life safety. Something that was not OSHA compliant, chemicals unlabeled, hazards unlabeled, falling hazards, tripping hazards, things along those lines. Few exposed electrical wires maybe. Things that really needed to be addressed from a safety perspective, and we said from our perspective, these should be addressed immediately. Category A is assets that needed to be repaired in the 0 to 5 year category, and that's generally the focus, what we call short-term improvements. We also looked at assets with what we thought were a 6 to 10 year life, so somewhere in 6 to 10 years, you should be looking towards replacing them. And then category C is assets in the 11 to 20 year time frame. So again, things that could be relatively new, you still have over a decade of life in them, but the goal was to try to develop a capital plan to see what in the future you needed to look towards replacement. So I'm going to go through some of the findings for the water system now. We had over 200 findings, so sit back, get comfortable. No, I promise I won't do that. It is in this book though, and we did look at everything from individual valves to repointing bricks to much larger things, which we'll talk about, but it's a very comprehensive look at the different items. But we're going to talk about significant items that we're going to be talking about in the future, not the valves and the pressure gauges and things along those lines. So from a standpoint of just overall system, quality, the village has exceptional quality drinking water. There's been no violations on any of the contaminants. That is not, there is no issues as far as testing that have been noted. So from a Department of Health compliance standpoint, the quality is good. Quantity, there is some question. When we look at the original well installation logs, they show a quantity that is consistent with meeting Department of Health requirements, which is your largest well out of service, you could still provide the needed capacity. However, based on the current operation reports, that shows a lower yield from some of the more critical wells. And if you took your largest out of service, you would not meet that you would not meet the Department of Health criteria. So what we recommended is there really needs to be an updated hydrologic study. Some of these wells have been installed for a very long time. It is very possible their yield could change over time. But mostly with the Woodmark wells, I think we need to understand better. When they were installed, they were rated at 50, but they've been being utilized more at a 20 gallon per minute capacity. And that really is the difference to whether you meet Department of Health's definition of do you have sufficient yield or not. So that's the main question where we feel additional study needs to be taken to get a firm hold on whether you have sufficient by the Department of Health guidelines capacity. So I'm going to describe a common thing we noticed at the well houses. And I showed the McKnight well house. There is one off of Route 9, it's called Pots, but in most cases they're little brick buildings. There's a wood building right next to the water tower itself. So I don't know if anyone's noticed these buildings before, but these are your well houses. this is what we see as a typical well house in general. You've got everything up in the, let's call it grade level, and then there's heat and air conditioning. So all metering and treatment equipment's above grade, the well casing extends above grade, our floor is above grade, and this is more typical. This is a Tivoli style well house. Everything is below grade. Now why would you do that? Because you can see my big no sign. Everything's below grade. You have no heat or air conditioning needs. So that's a great cost savings. But from a safety and ease of operation standpoint, it is very challenging. This ladder, this is a good representation of the ladder. This is not my shoddy drawing. It is a very steep and often rung-skipped ladder. Sometimes they're made of wood, they're made of metal. They're without a doubt not OSHA compliant. And often it involves lowering chemicals by ropes. This is not a great area to be working in, but also for ease of just knowing what's going on with your treatment system, this is a very difficult area to access. So this is pretty much across the board what the well houses in Tivoli look like. This is what our recommendation was based on. It's keeping everything below grade, but raising up all the controls and commands so you don't have to access that ladder. So bringing all readout remote, allowing the chemicals to be filled from the first floor instead of having to lower them down, and also a common Department of Health comment is connecting everything to what's called a SCADA system. So what that means is remotely, you can see what's happening in your water system. You don't need to crawl down that ladder to see what's going on. And the Department of Health has been asking for that particularly, so we agree with them that that would be a very important asset to have. At each of these well locations, at each of the well house locations, you are treating your drinking water. So it's not just a place where the well is pumping water out of the ground, that's also where the disinfection is happening. So it's a pretty critical activity that's happening in these well houses, and to know what's going on there is important. So another critical water item is the water main condition. So during our study period, there were 15 water main breaks that had occurred in the last 12 months in 2015 to 16. The oldest pipe section, there had been, that's 1938, 6 breaks. The next oldest section, 8 breaks from 57. And there actually had been a break in the sections that have been installed since 1986. So our recommendation is to, starting with the oldest section, is to start replacing this pipe systematically or lining it. In some cases, so there is lining you can do, it's structural, and so that means that you do not need to have pipe in great condition. If, as long as it is still a circle, which sometimes water mains are not, they start to corrode in, and Jim could probably tell me the sections that have calcified so much they no longer look like a circle. But we've absolutely assumed in some areas that lining can work. In other areas, we recommend replacement. And that has to do also with fire flow. The diameter in some sections isn't sufficient to bring the appropriate amount of fire flow, especially to Broadway. And that's where that's most needed and has the highest fire flow demand. The water tower. So, the coatings on the water tower are in poor condition and they don't meet current regulations. It's also not sufficiently sized for fire flow. So I'm just going to explain this in 2 different ways. The current tower is 150,000 gallons. To take all the coatings off that tower and repaint the tower, both outside and inside, both the outside and inside need to be painted. For that cost, you could build a new 150,000 gallon water tank, but you don't need 150,000 gallons. You need 250,000 gallons. So even though you could keep the same tank and paint it, it won't make it larger. And that's when we look at our needed capacity and needed fire flow, that tank can't, there's nothing you can do to grow that tank to an additional capacity. So without a doubt, replacing the tank and finding an acceptable replacement is the most economic way to get from here to there. And even if we just needed 150,000 gallons, replacing the tank is the most economic route to get from here to there. And with that, I'm going to discuss some of that's the level of critical I wanted to talk about. Again, in the report itself, we go through every single item, and I welcome you to look at this report, but I thought it was more important today to talk about the critical key items versus every single item. So, wastewater, we have about 150 different items, individual items we've looked at and assessed. So again, we'll start with quality and quantity. In our time period we reviewed, there were no quality violations from the wastewater treatment plant. So as you know, all the wastewater from the toilets, from your sinks, go to the plant. They treat it using various different physical processes and chemical processes, UV, to disinfect it. And when it's done, it is discharged to a water body. There are requirements that must be met from New York State as far as the quality of that wastewater. From a quality standpoint, in our review time period, there have been no violations. So you were meeting the effluent limits. However, from a quantity standpoint, we weren't doing as well. The permitted daily flow was 100,000 gallons per day. So that means in one day, the wastewater treatment plant can discharge 100,000 gallons. Throughout the day, the actual flow rate fluctuates, but at the end of the day, that's the average. There were recorded peak daily flows of 226,000 gallons per day. So that's more than twice what the permitted flow is. So during our time period, we started looking at 2014 till the completion of this report. There had been 6 violations where the permitted flow had been exceeded. So why is this happening? Inflow and infiltration. Inflow is cracks in your pipes, and so a sewer system is pipes and manholes. We see the manholes. I had a picture on the previous screen of a manhole cover, and beneath those manhole covers are concrete or brick structures that your wastewater pipes connect to and run through. When things get old, they start to get creaky and sometimes leak. Certainly, based on the ages of the pipes and the ages of those structures, water from stormwater or groundwater can seep into your sewer system. Stormwater and groundwater do not belong in the sewer system. They belong elsewhere. Only wastewater belongs in the sewer system. Inflow is when there's direct connections from stormwater into the sewer system. So these could be connected catch basins, which we didn't identify, at least at the manholes, any place we thought that existed. Connected downspouts. Sump pumps can fall into either category. Could be because of infiltration or inflow. Depends on exactly what's going on. Manhole covers that are set way down and stormwater sits on them, there could be a source of inflow. But it's stormwater and groundwater getting into your sewer system which causes these high flows. It's not everyone in Tivoli flushes their toilet at the same time. On dry weather days, there's no problem and your average flows are very reasonable. It's during storm events where you see these high flows. So one of the things that we did is we did indeed, Joel didn't make anything up, we did look at every single manhole in the village and have pictures of them. We could definitely have another night of just looking at manhole pictures and videos, as a matter of fact. So what the majority of the manholes definitely were in the older section that had problems. And we did see structural problems, leaking structures themselves, leaks around the lid and the frames, and then root intrusion. So root intrusion is from local trees, and roots start coming in around where the pipe joins the manhole and through the sides, and then it opens up a pathway for groundwater to get into that structure. So if we have roots, we generally have water coming into our structures. However, we didn't see enough infiltration sources in the manholes to equal the quantity of wastewater you see at the treatment plant. We did TV a large section of the sewer system, this section here, which runs down the stream bed. And without a doubt, that section of pipe has some flaws. There's some cracks and damage, and again, a lot of root intrusion. So looking at that section and applying it to the rest of the village, there are quite a few pipes that need repair and replacement within the village. And so we've recommended that. And again, that can be done with lining and actual dig and replacement, depending on what's more cost effective. So the other recommendation we made, again, is in conjunction with looking at I&I and these large peaks we see. The existing equalization tank was installed in 1971. It is a steel tank. In 2008, it decided it didn't want to be in the ground anymore, and due to high groundwater, it left, floated out, and then it was put back in the ground. It is not in good condition, and currently, flow can't be directed there automatically. So if high flows start to come into the plant, it takes Jim to turn a valve to get flow to be directed towards this tank. It doesn't happen automatically. At midnight, that's a big challenge. We recommended replacing the equalization tank with a new tank and appropriately sized to actually cut some of these peak flows. So high flows not only violate your permit, why do they care about it? It's because it hurts your treatment capacity and hurts your other treatment components that are trying to make high quality wastewater that doesn't pollute our water bodies. So when you get flows over the permitted limits, they hurt the system. So capturing them is something we recommended. Now, if we can hunt down some of this infiltration and inflow in the collection system, that can greatly reduce the size of the equalization tank needed. So there is a relationship here, but certainly I thought it was important to spotlight that both of these relatively costly improvements are based on these high peak flows that the Tivoli plant sees. I'm just going to talk about a few more of the critical wastewater system improvements. The clarifier tanks, so I'm not going to go through, but you have steel tanks at the plant. They're an important part of the treatment process. Clarifiers are what remove solids. They are, again, older, not as old as 1971, but older steel tanks, and they are in poor condition. They're right on the cusp, and where if you let it go rusting much further, they're just going to be dig and replace. So sandblasting and painting, I am pretty strongly believe DEC brought this up and that this is going to be in process soon.
Yeah, we've awarded a contract already.
Okay, so this is an important thing that was on a very high priority list. The sludge reed beds have not been cleaned out since 2006. That is an atypical time frame for them not to be cleaned out for, and would function much better if they were cleaned out. So that's an important recommendation. And again, we talked in the water system about communications and connecting the plant. There is no automated alarm system. If there is a power outage, failed equipment, or those high flows from a storm event. And so providing feedback, automated alarm systems, so folks know when something's going on at the plant is pretty important. So that's another recommendation. You can see the photos here. That's one of the clarifiers that is going to be coated. So that's fantastic. That's, again, we're at the point where it needs to be done. If it goes much further, we're in trouble. And these are one of the sludge beds, reed beds that are at the plant. So how did we develop our costs? We looked at, called vendors and got replacement equipment costs. We considered from previous work demolition and removal of existing equipment. For instance, if we replace that equalization tank, that there's some cost to getting rid of the existing one. Installing new equipment, and then also temporary facilities. If you're going to take the pump station offline for a while, the temporary pumps need to be set up while that's happening. We use standard markups, so contractor, overhead and profit, engineering costs, and also project 20% contingency. Just, we think in these budgetary stages, it's better to really have a number that's on the higher end than promise that, oh, it can be done for this much, and then when things go out to bid, you're the low bidder, which no engineering firm ever wants to be. So here's some numbers. For wastewater, the immediate costs, and you know what, I actually just want to mention one more thing about the cost. We also considered the costs not as if we bid this out in one project, that an outside contractor, not in-house staff, was asked to do one project at one time. So these numbers don't recognize any economy of scale, and they also don't recognize that in-house staff can change a valve, can change a pressure gauge. But it's important for us to present the numbers across the board the same way. So these are all publicly bid, union wages, done in independent projects. So no in-house staff doing maintenance activities. Certainly some of this work can be done. So immediate costs for wastewater. Again, mostly safety items, and that's the big concern. For the collection system, this dollar value has to do with abandoning appropriate equipment at the wastewater pump station, and some safety improvements there, and then at the treatment system. And those values are $10,100 and $29,300. For the wastewater system, our short-term costs, so this is this analysis, the focus of it is the 0 to 5 years. And for the collection system, that's $612,000. That is mostly focused on lining and repairing pipe, as well as some improvements to the pump station. And the treatment system, $1.5 million. That is new tanks, a new headworks, a diversion system so you can use that equalization tank. It includes the values of coating your tanks, which you are already on your way to doing. And of course, the communications issue and making sure that there is remote communications at the treatment plant. And of course, those other items I talked about, the cleaning out the sludge beds, getting a contractor to come in and do that as well. This says wastewater, and I apologize, this is water. For the distribution system, there's not much immediate things that we identified. It's $5,000 to fix those. For the treatment system, $43,000. There were some improvements we'd like to see on the chemical safety in each of those well fields, labeling and splash pads and things along those lines. For the short-term costs, and again, that's the 0 to 5 year time frame with a distribution system, which includes the water tower as part of the distribution system. That's $2.8 million. The treatment systems, which are the chemical disinfection systems located within each of the well fields, $239,800 are in the next 5 years for what we recommend for those systems. And you saw the graphic that includes the improvements we'd like to see at each of the well fields. Bringing those things out from the basement, out from that ladder, and into the first level for easy access. This is the point where we've developed the capital costs, and the next stage was understanding what the village budgets were and how that translates to rates. And I'm going to turn it over to Bridget to talk about that section. Thank you.
Barkley. I'm the Executive Director with the Dutchess County Water and Wastewater Authority. Our role, let me first begin, give you a little bit of a sense of who we are. The Water and Wastewater Authority is a public benefit corporation that was established by Dutchess County. So we are not a Dutchess County department, but we were created by the county specifically to address water and wastewater issues throughout the county. We are governed by a 5-member board of directors who are appointed to those positions by the county executive and the county legislature. And our mission, again, is to deal with water and wastewater. We do work with municipalities to help them in planning and making improvements to infrastructure. We also own and operate water and wastewater systems. We took over our first sewer system in 1995. We now operate 18 water systems, 6 sewer systems. We serve a total of about 5,500 customers located in 10 different municipalities in Dutchess County. We have a full-time professional staff of 23. That includes management staff, administrative staff. We have a staff engineer, and we have water and wastewater operators that hold the highest licenses for those functions in New York State. Sorry, I jumped ahead at some point. So in terms of our role in this project, we were involved from the outset, assisting the village in initially getting the grant, developing the scope of work, and selecting the engineer to do the evaluations. And we were tasked specifically with developing a plan for operating these systems under the authority's ownership if the village wants to make the decision to move in that direction. And that included looking at how we would approach the capital improvements that are needed to the systems, and developing a budget for operations under the Water and Wastewater Authority, and then ultimately translating that into what really is one of the most important things to everybody. What does that look like for a typical customer in terms of their total annual cost for the water and the wastewater systems? Joel mentioned earlier the transfer feasibility study report that we created as part of this. Its intent is to pull the whole process together, to integrate the results of the engineering evaluations, the financial projections that I'll be talking about, the legal analysis that was done by Village Legal Counsel. It discusses what the ownership transfer process would look like if the village decided to go in that direction, and then provides some items for discussion, things that we think that the elected officials of the village and you as the customers of the village should think about in terms of deciding whether the village wants to maintain ownership or transfer ownership to the Water and Wastewater Authority. So Aaron left off with their completion of the estimates of the capital costs to make the improvements that they're recommending to the systems. She also mentioned that they did a financial evaluation of the operating costs, what the expense history, what the revenue history has been for the systems under the village ownership. We did a parallel process looking at what operations and maintenance expenses would look like under the Wastewater Authority. So together, those two pieces are intended to provide an apples-to-apples comparison for the village elected officials and for you, the customers, to help guide you in this decision ultimately of the ownership. So we made a set of assumptions that were the same in each case, under village ownership and under the authority ownership. In both cases, we started with the village's adopted 2016 budget and rates for the water system and the sewer system. We assumed that most items increased with inflation at a rate of 2% a year. We acknowledged that the capital improvements needed to be funded. And I will add that through our participation in the evaluation process, we were very familiar with, understood fully the recommendations that Time Bond was making as far as the improvements to the system that are needed, and absolutely unquestionably agree with the scope of those improvements and the prioritization of those improvements. So when we looked at how we would approach the overall financial management of the system, we assumed that those capital improvements were going to be made at the costs that Aaron estimated and in the time frames that they estimated. So again, you've got apples to apples assumptions being made for both projection of costs under the village and under the Water and Wastewater Authority. The assumption in both cases is that the projects are going to be funded through low-interest state revolving loan funds for water and wastewater. Generally, the state will fund improvements over a 30-year time frame. We used in these analyses, again, both for the village ownership and authority ownership, an assumption of a 2% per year rate. Interest rate on those borrowings. Actually, we were at a workshop earlier today where the state said that they're lending money at about 1.5% for water projects and about 1.9% for water, for drinking water projects. So I think that those are reasonable assumptions. In terms of the assumptions that were made for the village's continued ownership, it assumed the same level of staffing, the same structure for those costs. So continuing to use the village clerk to do administration for the system, billing and bookkeeping, and continuing to rely on the same staff for your existing DPW for the operations of the system. And again, then took other costs like chemicals, sludge, insurance, and so on, and assumed that those were going to escalate at a rate of about 2% per year. When we looked at developing the estimates for operation and expense under the Water and Wastewater Authority, we assumed that indirect or third-party costs that the village has had historically were going to remain the same regardless of ownership. So the cost of doing lab sampling, the cost of chemicals, the cost of sludge hauling, the cost of electricity. We used the same expense history that was used to put together the projections under village ownership. For those functions that would be provided specifically by the Water and Wastewater Authority, our administration of the system, the billing, bookkeeping, budget development, management, oversight, and so on, we used our own internal policies of how we allocate our costs and what our track record has been historically of our costs to provide those functions. So the end result, and I will note that there is significantly more detail on these numbers. That's available in the engineering evaluations, and that's available in the transfer feasibility study. And I would note that all of those documents are also available on the village's website. So anybody who wants to delve into the numbers in more detail, that is absolutely available. But the upshot, at the end of the day, what's the total annual cost to a typical customer? Total annual cost includes all of the costs of the day-to-day operation of the facilities, and it also includes the costs to finance those 0 to 5 year capital improvements and the immediate capital improvements that Aaron talked about. Typical customer in the case of the village is a residential property or a small commercial user. So something like an office building, a small shop where there's not a particular unusual high level of water usage and wastewater production. So we've got total annual cost, operation and capital for a typical customer, and we show what those look like over the next 5 years projected if the village were to maintain ownership or if the Water and Wastewater Authority were to acquire the systems. And I think what really jumps out with this is that there's not a huge difference between cost of operation under either the village or the authority. What really is going to impact your costs going forward is the cost of those capital improvements that need to be made regardless of who owns the system. Sewer, again, all of the same assumptions. Total cost is operations and capital expenses. Typical customers, single-family residents, small business, and then the cost projected out. And as with the water, what you're seeing is that the big difference is between 2017 and 2018, because that's the point at which we assume that a borrowing is made to make those capital improvements to the system. So this budget, as we're showing it, funds those immediate improvement items and adds into the equation the debt service that's going to be carried on money that's borrowed to make the large capital improvements. Because there are also improvements projected for years 6 through 10 and 11 through 20, I think was the next time frame that was used. Further down the road, you would see other increases for the cost of making additional upgrades to the system. There is more detail again on those in the transfer feasibility study and in the engineering evaluation. One important thing to note is, like any kind of projection, the further out in time that you take it, the less definitive you can be about the accuracy of those. So we felt what was most important is to show you what the potential costs look like over the next couple of years. It doesn't necessarily mean at this point in time that a borrowing is going to be done in 2018 and you're going to see that debt service cost. We felt it was the most appropriate way, again, to have an apples to apples comparison to show you with the same set of assumptions, numbers under village ownership, numbers under authority ownership. As a practical matter, if either the village or the authority is successful in funding the programs through the state subsidized loan programs, generally what you see there is a short-term borrowing that takes you through the time period that you're doing the design, you're doing the construction. During that time, you're paying interest on only a very small amount of that loan that you've actually drawn down. And then you're seeing the long-term borrowing take place at approximately the end of the construction time. So you've done the work, you've got the improvements in place, you're realizing the benefits of those improvements at the point that you start seeing the increased costs to fund those. So we presented a combined water and sewer as well, so you can see what the overall impact together is. Again, I would emphasize that really what's causing the biggest difference in what your potential rates could be in the future is not the ownership, but the need to make those improvements. Roughly, the numbers are pretty comparable. If you look out into the later years, we're projecting the authority's costs for it's about a 2% difference. And when we look at the details of the budget, what that really comes down to is we made some different assumptions about increasing the amount that should be budgeted for equipment repair and maintenance, because even with the capital improvements that are planned to be made, there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be maintained. And then we have projected slightly higher costs for the resources that are needed to manage those capital improvement projects going forward. So again, a lot more detail available should anybody want it in the underlying reports. So what if the village decides to go forward with the transfer? What happens? The first thing we do, because the authority has been through this many times, with two exceptions, all of the systems that we own and operate were previously owned by either municipalities, homeowners associations, or private entities. So at this point, we've got a pretty standard approach to doing these transfers. We develop a transfer agreement that's essentially a roadmap. It identifies all the things that have to happen for that transfer to move forward, what the authority's responsibilities are, what the village's responsibilities are. And at this point, too, I want to stop for a minute and talk about the legal analysis that was done. While it did not identify anything that is an impediment or a specific obstacle, anything that prohibits the village from transferring the ownership, the biggest thing that came out of that legal analysis was really issues related to property ownership. That there have been over time circumstances that have evolved where there's infrastructure that the village owns that's not wholly on village property. There's private structures, private uses that have encroached onto some of the properties that the village owns. There are instances where there are not easements or aren't documentation of easements. And one particular instance where there is some infrastructure on land that could be legally determined to be parkland. And there are specific laws and procedures that have to be followed in New York State if you're transferring land out of a parkland designation. So through that transfer agreement is where the details of those property issues would really be worked out, the process for resolving them. There would be surveys involved, there would be title searches involved. Before the authority will take ownership of a water or sewer system, we create districts at the county level, a county water district and a county sewer district. The purpose of those districts is twofold. It literally it draws a line around the properties that are served by the infrastructure, served by the systems, and who are responsible collectively for the costs of those systems. We do that in cooperation with Dutchess County. So we would prepare a document called a map, plan, and report. It describes the systems in detail. It describes what the costs under the authority would be to operate those systems. It identifies the capital improvements that are planned to be made, what it would cost to fund those, and how those costs would be allocated. So essentially, a lot of the work that we've already done in the transfer feasibility study would be laid out in that map, plan, and report document. That goes to the county legislature. They hold a public hearing. Anybody is free to appear before the county legislature and speak about why you think this is a good idea, why you think it's a bad idea. If the county legislature decides to go ahead and create the districts to allow the transfer to move forward, that action of the legislature is then subject to what's called a permissive referendum. And what that means is that you, as the owners of property within the proposed districts, can, by a formal legal petition, trigger a vote. It's 5% or 100 property owners, whichever is the less. If a petition is submitted to the legislature and a referendum is triggered, then it essentially becomes a majority vote of the people who live within the proposed district that are registered to vote. So if 51% say, yep, we want this to go forward, the act of the legislature stands and we move forward with the transfer. If 51% say no, and there is no electoral college, so it's a little more straightforward, if 51% say no, then there is no district and there is no transfer of ownership. So from our perspective, I mean, it's certainly a part of the process that has to be gone through, but I think it's a very good part of the process because what that means is that we know, you know, your elected officials know that if the residents don't support this, you have opportunities as the process goes forward to stop it. So there is no incentive, there's no motivation to move forward in the process unless there really is a strong belief that this is something that the residents support and agree. All that happens, then we get to the closing. The assets transfer, the property transfers, fund balance in the system transfers, the authority adopts our budgets and sets rates, and then from that point forward, we provide you the water service, the sewer service, we bill you for those services. You call our people at midnight if there's an overflow or a backflow instead of Jim. So couple things that, having been through this process before with other communities, that we think the village should consider. And keeping in mind here, the goal of this entire process has been what ownership is in the best interest of the village and the village residents going forward. That's what this has all been about. So questions to think about. Through the evaluation that was done by Time Bond, we all know that there are significant upgrades to the water and sewer system that need to be made regardless of who owns it. And just to emphasize some points that both Joel and Aaron made earlier, deferred maintenance has a cost. It starts impacting the reliability of your service, the quality of the water that you're getting. You have infrastructure that will deteriorate more rapidly as time goes on. You start experiencing more expensive repairs. I mean, certainly the worst way to have to make a repair to a wastewater system is as an emergency. That's always going to be when it's most costly and expensive. So customer cost, affordability of the service is absolutely important. But we always say you have to look at that over the long term, not the short term, so that you're balancing affordability with the need to properly manage and protect those assets over the long term. Because you're not going anywhere, your water system's not going anywhere, your wastewater system's not going anywhere. The management of those capital improvement projects is a complicated and involved process. You're talking about applying for grants, applying for low-interest loans, dealing with the administrative requirements that come with those funding sources, the day-to-day operation of the system while you're going through an improvement project, developing the scope for the engineers to do the design, selecting and supervising those engineers, seeing the projects through the permitting and approval process, managing multiple construction contracts, and then integrating those new improvements into your operation are complicated and time-consuming activities. And one thing to ask, and for the village to ask, is do you have the resources to do that? How do you get the resources to do that? And what are the cost of the resources if you choose to keep those systems? Another thing that makes it difficult too is a typical capital improvement project for a water or sewer system is going to easily have a 2 to 4 year life cycle. And that's challenging to manage when you've got elected officials that have 2-year terms. So you often are finding municipalities that deal with a project that gets started in a feasibility phase under one administration. A new administration comes in. By the time they get up to speed, they decide to go in a different direction. They get the project started. A new administration comes in. So that can make it particularly challenging as well. And then the final thing to think about is what's the best use of the village's resources. You have very, very committed, dedicated, talented people that work in the village who are all trying to do about 10 jobs at one time. So are there things that they and only they can do that they would have a greater ability to focus on if they weren't also dealing with the challenges of aging water and wastewater infrastructure? So with that, we're at the point in this overall process from the starting of getting the grant funding to the evaluation through the development of the feasibility study, where it's time, as Joel said, to have the public conversation, to give you an opportunity to make your comments, to raise your questions, and that's what we're here to do. So thank you.
So, yeah, we'll open it up to your questions. I want to say something I should have said earlier, which is, where can you find these reports? So, as Bridget said, all 3 reports are on the village website. You go to the homepage, you go to the menu that says Government, and you go to Document Center. There's about 3 different places on the website where you can stumble onto the Document Center, and you will see the 3 reports there. If you want to read a hard copy, we have a few copies. We have several at the clerk's office, and we have several at the village library downstairs if you want to do your reading on Saturday when the clerk's office is closed. However, you cannot leave with those. You have to read them at the clerk's office or at the library. We don't have enough hard copies for everyone to take it home and keep it on your nightstand. So now that, earlier I was feeling really quite terrible that more people weren't here. But, this is the beginning, and I feel a little less terrible now because you're going to tell your neighbors, and people are going to see this on Panda, and they're going to say, why didn't I know about that meeting? And we're going to say, you can watch it on Panda, and this is where the reports are. I mean, I'm sure most of us haven't read this whole report yet, but now you might be more interested in diving into it after tonight's presentation. So that's where they are. Plenty of information in there, as much as you want, but I think you've got the picture from Aaron and Bridget, and so if you have questions for them, we've got plenty of time this evening. Karen, please. I don't know how we will do this. You want to come up?
You need to stay there, though, Joel. My question.
I'll be here to play Bob Barker. Yes, Karen.
My question probably is to Bridget. You talked about grant money, and that's always been first and foremost in my thinking, grant money, because I know Senator Schumer has been an advocate for finding money for water, so mostly new projects.
without exception, we are eligible for all of the same funding programs that the village would be eligible for. The one that we are not eligible for is Community Development Block Grant, administered by the county, which is generally smaller dollar amounts. We're not talking about, $500,000, $1 million grants. But as far as the water improvement infrastructure grants that the state has come out with, revolving loan fund, low interest loans were eligible, water quality improvement grants, USDA rural development, water and wastewater grants and loans we are eligible for. We have gotten grants for a number of the improvements to systems that we own and operate. We have, right now, we're closing on contracts with Department of State on a $400,000 grant for some of the High Park systems that we recently acquired. We have 6 capital improvement projects right now that are being funded by low interest loans from the state. One of those is a 0% interest loan because of the financial hardship issues.
Phyllis?
I'm confused about when you put the 2 costs up there of the village and then that whole thing there. In other words, yeah, they're very close, so you think, oh, well, what's the big deal? But we're talking about hours and hours of I don't understand how they can be so close, I guess, how the cost can be so close, unless it means that these guys are going to do nothing else in their life except for apply for grants and administer all these. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, one of the, if there are advantages to transfer, one of those advantages would be that we are freed up to do all sorts of other things. I know we recently invited Aileen Rohr, supervisor of Town High Park, to come talk to the village board because they transferred 2 years ago. And she said that before the transfer, I mean, she was spending 60% of her time on water and sewer. Now that's a lot of time for her to do every other thing that needs to get done. Speaking personally, there are things that we are the best at, no offense, right? So local problems, planning and zoning, some of our quality of life issues that we've been working very hard on, we understand that stuff, and no one can do that better than us. There are other things like operating a water and sewer system, which, no apologies, we're maybe not the best at, right? And so I think that trade-off of time. But the other reason, back to your question about why are these numbers so similar, it's because it's the same list of repairs and upgrades. Regardless of who owns it, you still have to fix,
Right.
all the same things. That's why the costs are so similar. Tom?
A question on those rates. Whether it's village or Dutchess County water, it says annual cost. Is that in addition to your water cost and sewer cost? Or is that what a typical person is going to spend over the course of the year?
That's intended to be what a typical person is going to spend over the course of a year.
Yeah.
So included in that is you currently get billed quarterly for the operation expenses for the system, so you continue to get quarterly bills. So that reflects all of those expenses over a year.
For the year right now, I'm at probably $1,800 a year. So I can't see where that number is anywhere towards correct.
So this is, if you want to speak to the average.
Sure. So is that for a home? Is that
That's
for
for a
business?
home with 6 people.
Okay. So we assumed the same rate structure that the village currently has in place. So for usage up to a minimum amount of 10,000 gallons over a quarter, there's a set charge, and then there's additional cost per thousand for water use above that. Your sewer is charged based on the amount of water. If that truly is what your total annual cost is for your water and your wastewater, then either you're using significantly more, your meter is showing you're using significantly more water than what a typical customer uses, or there's something wrong with your meter, but that's essentially, they are billing based on your meter usage.
I can't tell you either. I can't tell you whether the meter don't work, or it doesn't work, or whatever, but that's the average bill is about $450 a quarter.
So like our minimum right now.
Yeah,
you
I know what the minimum is.
So the minimum is what, $121? It's, how much, water and sewer, 74, and, yeah, so that's what it is now, and 5 years from now, about double.
That's quarterly, Joe.
Right, so when you add up,
That's 200 a quarter, right?
so the minimum's 120 a quarter times 4 quarters, and you add about,
That's water and sewer?
it's water and sewer, that's why, I actually asked Bridget when we were showing, they kept showing water and sewer, I said, show them combined, because that's how we're used to seeing our bills, right? Pete?
I have one question for the administrator and one for the engineer. For the administrator first, this might be an odd question, but I was wondering if you might be able to give me both your best argument for and maybe even your best argument against going with the Dutchess County
Sure.
Water Authority.
I'll give you the best argument against first. What we consistently find is an issue that is raised, and I think probably the biggest question in people's mind is that right now you know exactly who the people are who are running your water and sewer system, right? There he is. You see him in the coffee shop, you run into him in the street, you run into Joel. And especially in a village like this, I'm sure you all have a very high comfort level that you know exactly who those people are. You can pick up the phone, you can call them. They know you on a first name basis, and that we are a step removed from that. We are not located here in Tivoli, we're based out of Poughkeepsie. We're governed by a board of directors who are not elected officials, and in part by design specifically so that decisions are not being made by people who are subject to not being reelected next November if people don't like what they're doing. The thought being that these systems really need to be run by businesses. But that's a change. That is absolutely a difference. We work very hard to counteract that, to be very accessible and accountable. We have, I had previously had our website up. We post information on our website. We send information out when we send bills out that lets you know what's going on with the system. We give you numbers that you can call 24/7 to contact us if there's an emergency. We're a public organization. We're subject to open meetings law, freedom of information law. We have a public hearing every year when our board reviews the budgets and sets the rates. We always offer up the option of developing a local advisory committee that we will work with. And many of the systems that we've taken over generally will start off with an advisory committee at the beginning of the process, and we'll come up and talk to you about what's going on with the systems. They tend to kind of lose interest over time once they develop a comfort level, but that absolutely is the biggest change that you're dealing with. The biggest advantage, I would say, is that this is what we do, this is all we do. We have full-time professional staff that deal with these. I will not tell you that we've not ever made a mistake with developing a capital project or managing a project, but we learn from those because we're doing it over and over again. We are doing right now, with Time Bond, we're doing an upgrade to the Greenfield sewer system that we took over from Hyde Park that is very similar to the upgrades that your system needs. We are doing with Time Bond an evaluation of the inflow and infiltration in the Greenfield sewer system. We are managing projects like that on a daily basis. And when you look at the kind of dollars that you're looking at spending, costs can add up quickly, mistakes can become very expensive very quickly. And we work very hard to manage those projects to avoid that happening.
And Pete, did you have something for Aaron as well?
You always manage to get more questions.
Yeah.
Answer great.
It's just a quick one, this might be outside your wheelhouse, but have you yet developed the technology to clone and train the replacements of Jim Simmons?
You know, there's a few expressions, you know, it's not abducted by aliens, win the lottery, but this is you asked a very pertinent question, and it is, does the village budget include cloning Jim? And it doesn't. It includes your clerk still doing the billing, and Jim's still running the water and wastewater department. And what if he goes into Stewart's? What if this happens and he buys the Powerball ticket and he gets to dress like that every day because he's not going to be here. He's going to be with a boat drink
We
somewhere.
don't know.
Yeah, but this does happen. And this happens at bigger municipalities than this, 100%. We have licensed operators on staff and have been called in to operate a plant where there was a dispute and an argument, and the wastewater treatment plant operator said, sayonara, and left, and that municipality had no licensed operator. Now, that's not going to happen, but you know, I hope the lottery happens for any of us, but that is a very important scenario, and I can guarantee you it has happened. We're very lucky to have operations on staff and can swoop in to bail that situation out, but it's not easy to replace a licensed person, but even more important than the licensed is the institutional knowledge. The amount of information that Jim has about the system that we can't even possibly imagine is so valuable that to have backup and have a way to deal with that is really important. And so it's hard, you can't address it with a dollar value, but it's a non-budgetary issue that I think is very important to acknowledge.
Mike? Along those lines, I was wondering right now if there's a alarm goes off at midnight and Jimmy gets a call, he goes and fixes it. If this happens when it's under the new administration, who's going to come at midnight and fix it?
We are.
Do you
We
have
are
contractors
people
on
we
call?
employ.
Is that the way it works? Or?
Yeah. We operate our systems with a combination of our own staff and contract operators, firms that do this as their business. But in every system, there is always a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week emergency number, and there is always somebody who is designated at any point in time to respond to an emergency, because they happen in all systems, and we deal with that on a regular basis.
Andrew?
Yeah, I have questions about the budget. So, do the numbers for the village budget take into account either like the possibility of getting grants, so that would be a benefit, or the potential of needing to hire additional staff to manage what it would take for the village to do it by itself?
The answer is no. The budget numbers for ownership under the village assume that the current staffing level stays the same, both as far as the administrative side and the operations. There's increases over time because we built inflation into everything. But other than that, there's no change. There's no additional resources. The only assumption that's built in as far as the financing, the capital improvements, is that we all did agree it was reasonable to assume that the projects would qualify for the low interest loans. So it's all based on a 30-year loan at 2% interest, but that's all that's factored. Both. Yeah, for both.
And if you were to take it on, DCWWA was to take it on, and you were able to get grants for the project, would that reduction be passed on to us?
Yes. Yes. We do administer the budgets and the financing for all of our systems individually. So a Tivoli sewer system customer is paying only for Tivoli sewer system expenses. A Hyde Park Greenfields water customer is paying only for wastewater customer expenses.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a similar question. Thank you for asking that. It kind of covered a lot of my question. The question I had is, are you under any sort of mandate to send out multiple bids to get a lowest bid, or because it sounds like there's a lot of chicken bond, which is fine. I'm sure you do a great job.
We're a low bidder, though. And it is, wait, I'll speak to that. Let me tell them, they're a very competitive owner. We have worked very hard and sharpened our pencils very sharp and we have been unsuccessful. There are other engineers. While I appreciate the advertisement, they are absolutely working with other engineers for their other systems. So it is a very competitive atmosphere, and we like working with them, so we work hard to get those projects. So, sorry for that. I can attest to that.
Kathy?
What are the steps to go from here to a thanks but no thanks, we'll hold on to the system, or to go to a transfer? What do we have to do between here and there?
So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we can decide, village board of trustees not to ask, right? That stops it right there.
So there,
And then, so that would be one way.
and I would just note there real quickly that if that is the decision of the village board, that this whole process has nevertheless been invaluable to you because of those reports you've now got that can guide you forward.
I mean, that I think is obvious to all of us. I mean, to have this information, regardless of what happens from here, was worth doing, worth getting. So we could, because the next step to go forward with the transfer would be, we write you and say, we'd like to develop this transfer agreement. Right? If we don't do that, it stops now. If we do that, then we go through that slide that Bridget showed of the various steps. It's sort of like it's like buying a house. You end up with your closing at the end, right? And get your keys.
But you can still, at the end, if a certain amount of people get together, they can't stop.
Yes, so the permissive referendum, it goes to the Dutchess County Legislature, and the numbers were,
Yeah, a referendum can be triggered by 5% of the owners or 100%, whichever is less.
so there's no vote unless people sign a petition.
25 to 30 households.
25 to 30 households could trigger a vote, and then it's actually just a majority, simple majority, no electoral college vote. And if it gets voted down, then that also ends it. So, yes, Karen?
How long is the agreement with them? If we decide to go with you, is it, it's
Forever.
to stay forever? They now own it, never
They now own it.
revert back to us.
It's for keeps. Danielle?
Right, so the only opportunity for everyone here to vote would be if it went forward, if you executed the transfer agreement, if there was a petition, if there was a referendum, but after that, it would transfer ownership to them. And in the future, if you raise rates or you needed to do more infrastructure, you would make the decision, and there would be no decision.
We would then be responsible for the decisions to own and manage the system in the manner that we feel it needs to be. Again, we are a public organization. Our board is appointed by the county executive, the legislature. We do hold public hearings annually on the budgets and the rates that we set. There are numerous other approvals that we need to go through to do a capital improvement project. We need the consent of the legislature to bond to do an improvement. We need to submit documentation to the regulatory agencies to get their approval for the upgrades. So there are other points in the process where there are other approvals that we need to continue to go forward with the project.
I have just a couple things to say. So, yes, let's be clear. If we transfer, it's for keeps. We are never going to have a water and sewer system again. And I have a question for you, Bridget. If we stop tonight and say, oh, thanks, no thanks, or if it gets voted down in a permissive referendum, can we change our minds? Can we come back and say, well, Griffith's gone, there's a new mayor, Major's here, and she said, wait, that was the wrong decision, and we have a second chance. I'm just curious if that's possible.
I would say the answer is yes. I mean, it hasn't happened, but you know, if you come to us and say, we'd like to have another look at this, we'd like to change our mind, there's no reason that we wouldn't work with you.
Other questions? Pete?
Not to pile on this whole concept, but just out of curiosity, when it does come to an issue of accountability, I mean, obviously, once you take over the system, you own the system, you administer it how you see fit. I understand you're not for profit, so the concept is not to go out and try to fleece us. But if there is a point, whether it be through the administration of the DCWWA or some other aspect of it, how is accountability dealt with, right? So how do we get to solve problems that we have if we don't actually own the system? If we feel that we're not being properly served for our money.
And you don't vote or elect that.
What?
Right.
That's accountability.
Right. And as I said at the outset in answer to your earlier question, it is not as direct an accountability. You don't vote for our board of directors.
Yeah.
You do vote for the county executive, you do vote for the legislature. I will tell you that we are in contact with them on a regular basis. We're in contact with the local officials, with the systems that we acquire. It's not in our interest that we develop a reputation for mismanaging systems, for being unaccountable. So it is a less direct accountability, but I do still feel like our board has a very strong commitment to managing these systems properly, to finding the best balance between the dollars and the protection of the assets and running the systems in the way that they need to be run for the long-term benefit.
Trustee Schneider had a comment.
Yeah, I just was listening to the question about our opportunity to weigh in on this and to vote before it gets to the point where we're either choosing to move forward with this transfer or the decision to keep it on our own. And I want to point out that meetings like tonight, don't forget that that's your opportunity to be heard. You're talking about what's your opportunity to vote right here. So we're going to continue to have a series of these very public, very announced meetings to give you that opportunity, because trust me when I say we don't want to make that decision for everybody. We need to work together as a community, as a village, and come to a decision that really is in the best interest of everybody. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you. And that's why I said this is the beginning, and I'm glad I did, because there is a very small portion of the users of the water and sewer system having this conversation tonight, and we need to get everyone else involved, because, I don't know, I guess we could be doing other things tonight too, but anyway, so, just the beginning. Danielle.
Can I just quickly jump to, I just want to explain, I feel like it was glossed over a little bit, and all of the quarterly water and wastewater data was provided to both I and Bridget from the village. And we know that this data is pretty darn good because it shows the consumption, and that number adds up to a number pretty darn close to what the well output is from each of your wells. So as far as the validation process, we think we have a very good list over multiple years of how much water is being billed and also how much water is being produced from the villages. I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're interested in sort of seeing where you stack up, that number is not, that list isn't hard to see. You know, we could obscure people's names if we don't want to publicly announce what each person's using. But, you know, that, you're a concern to me. If you're using that much, it'd be good to figure out why, and let's figure it out.
We've been complaining about that for years, that water bill has been outrageous for the years. And I can't see where 6 people uses that.
I mean, this is not the format, but you can see where you stack up in the village, and let's look at it, you know? I'm sorry, but just, you know, that's where my head is, let's solve this. But, you know, we should follow up and figure that out so you can feel either comfortable or not comfortable about how much you're using compared to your neighbors. Okay, sorry.
Erin is passionate about water and sewer.
Yeah.
Danielle?
So you guys are a public benefit court, right? So you're created by the state legislature, but you're subject to you're a creature of government.
Yes.
You just don't have it
Yes.
responsive,
Right.
you're not voting
Right,
in.
we are not governed by elected officials, we're governed by an appointed board. The organization was created by an act of the state legislature at the request of Dutchess County, and that state law that they enacted lays out in detail what powers and duties we have, and included in that, it makes us subject to all of the same rules that we would be subject to as a governmental
But
entity.
you're audited by
So-
the controller.
Yep.
Recently, right?
Recently, yeah. We were audited by the New York State Comptroller. They finished their audit in October. You can go on their website and find the reports. They did not issue a full report because they said there wasn't anything that they could find to comment on. And their staff told us at the time that that's very unusual. They provided a letter that said, we're done, we really didn't find anything.
And anecdotally, part of, why this took 3 years is there was definitely a month or two when I was calling Bridget. And you said that line.
We were being
We're being
audited.
audited. Okay, back to you.
And it was a 5-month process that we were audited by the state comptroller.
Lee?
Yeah, I was wondering in the comparison between the village holding on to the system and making these huge capital improvements. It'd be a big construction project, it's a lot of money. And I guess it was costing pretty much the same if the county does it. But if the village does it, wouldn't you need to hire an administrator for the construction project? And is that kind of cost included in the cost comparison?
Those costs are not included in the cost comparison.
No.
So it assumes
See, that seems
that if
like
we go
that's
out
a
and
big
win,
mistake.
if we go out and win, I don't know, $5 million, or take a loan, or we get these grants.
5 million.
That we and Robin are going to be able to manage this stuff responsibly. That's the assumption. And I think it would be disingenuous to say that we
wouldn't like it.
we wouldn't like it, that's for sure. But would we really be able to do a competent and responsible job for you? And I think we have to say that would be very difficult. And we might be inclined to hire, a professional, either grant writer, because we're hoping that we're going to get, either of us would get grants to make these numbers smaller, and it's not just 100% of the borrowing, But yes, that's an important point.
That would have to be really figured into the cost comparison to really.
But with that, and Mike, it goes back to my question before, you were saying these numbers are similar because these are the same costs. But your management and your management, this is a wild, we don't know what that's going to cost. I mean, if you guys have to hire people to help you manage this thing, and this represents the physical costs of the improvements, but you're talking about tons of management and tons of paperwork.
Which we build into our numbers, because included
That's included in these numbers?
Yes.
Yes.
That's
For the Water and Wastewater Authority, we are looking at historically what our costs are to operate the systems, to administer them, to manage the capital projects.
And I think Phyllis, what you're onto is that they have those people on staff currently. They have administrators, they have grant writers, they have those project managers. We don't. Now, it's true that, if you wanted to see numbers where those roles were added to our costs,
Yeah.
We don't have those numbers, but we know that they would be higher.
That might be the $20 per household difference.
So the base costs are developed and I'm responsible for them, so I'll explain that. Without a doubt, there are villages and towns that manage water and wastewater projects on their own. I don't know what the village of Tivoli would do, but the conservative, as far as assumption I felt was more conservative, was to say, okay, they're going to keep the same staff to do this. what else those village officials do while they're running a multi-million-dollar wastewater project, I'm not sure what gets accomplished, but without a doubt, I was present when the town clerk and supervisor for a town that will remain unnamed and a shopping cart, so they could bring a photocopier with them, went and got every easement for a sewer project that was going through backyards, and they went house to house and got that. So there are absolutely communities they stop everything else. That's what they're getting done. And so if I said, no, we're going to put in a dollar value there for the village hiring someone else, I guarantee you someone would be saying, well, we could do that ourselves. So it's really hard. I don't feel it would have been a justifiable position for me to put an additional salary in there.
That's fine.
Especially having had that experience, so.
Dan?
So I think this is a process question. I'm wondering, so there's all these recommendations for things to do, but of course there's lots of different ways to do them. But, in case of replacing the tank, I know that there's probably many varieties of 250,000 gallon tanks. Talking about fixing, pipes to reduce the intrusion, I think the word used.
Roof intrusion, yes.
Oh, yeah. So, I imagine there's also, sort of green infrastructure ways to do that with swales and things. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But the question is, I'm just curious, what is the difference process-wise for the kind of making these decisions about not what gets done, but how things get done? Because in other words, if there's a transfer, are we less likely to have, input on some of these things versus having access to the village?
So it would be different people making the decisions. I think that the parameters that you're going to look at are not going to be different. You're going to look at the best way to make the improvement, the most cost-efficient way to make the improvements. I mean, obviously, the storage tank is a good issue because obviously the storage tower has a lot of meaning in Tivoli. And we know from the process from day one, that's going to be an important issue for people. And we're aware of that. We would be sensitive to that. I think I would still make the case, as Aaron did, that spending the money that it would take to get that existing storage tower up to an acceptable standard, recognizing that it still doesn't provide you enough storage, we could not ever recommend in good faith that a community did that. So, but as an example of the kind of decisions that have to be made, the one thing I would say is that we have a lot more experience making these decisions and looking at the different options, looking at the different technologies that are available. We've had the opportunity of learning experiences to figure out the best way to get things done. That I think really is a significant advantage that we would have.
But there's still a public process and there's still public input on these kinds of decisions.
Again, it gets back to that issue of it's not as direct a connection. What we have done, I mentioned earlier, when we take over water and wastewater systems, is to offer up the opportunity to create a local advisory group that we would work with. And there was one system, I think for about 3 years, we met on a monthly basis as they were going through major upgrades to their system. So that would absolutely be something that we would do, to include residents, to include trustees, the mayor, to keep that communication open.
And this afternoon, Bridget, when we were hearing from EFC, they introduced
Joel just took the words out.
green infrastructure.
Green
They talked about that.
Yep.
I'm sure you followed that presentation more than I did, better than I did, but maybe we can speak about that because we were at a Senator Serino today at LaGrange this afternoon at one of these villages who's done it themselves, Wappendrews, and I don't think he did anything else.
Yeah.
It was like, however they did it. Anyway, they talked about they're trying to support the green approach with different funding opportunities, right?
Absolutely, and and what I just, even more so, there are a lot of different opportunities, but with those grant opportunities, Bridget's describing what she's responsible for. Most of the funding for wastewater is going to go through EFC, that's Environmental Facilities Corp. There's other water funding opportunities. Every single one of these opportunities, they list what you must do to be successful. A public involvement component is always required. So if there is any funding, the 0% grants for either water or wastewater, there is a big public input component that's always on the checklist, and you have very specific requirements. So I would bet very strongly there's going to be grants or public funding, state loans, and that means you must have a public input process. So that's one of the requirements.
Andrew?
Are there 250,000 gallon water towers that look similar to our current water tower available?
We don't need that tower.
And do they work in the budget that's proposed?
For the budget, I picked a mid option. There are 3 options presented. The short answer is yes. You want to talk about this now very briefly?
Yes.
Here's the,
Go ahead.
okay, all
I
right.
actually have to leave in 2 minutes.
So do it
Okay,
really briefly.
really briefly.
Yeah.
Here's your balance.
It's
That's
in here.
going to be
Yeah.
your tough decision moving forward. They do make what they lovingly call witch's hat style tanks still. They absolutely do produce those. Here's the problem. Anything steel, you have to repaint. And no more of this not repainting. It's got to be repainted
But not
every
like that.
20 years, not 40 years, not even, it might be 15 actually. We got to repaint it. There's glass-lined fuse tanks, glass fuse tanks, and you don't repaint them. So that's really, when you start to look at life cycle costs, what you've got to decide, because the steel tank could be cheaper, but when you paint it, it goes up like this, and then another 15 years and up like this, because we're at least looking at a minimum of 60-year life cycle. The glass fuse tanks, not witch's hats, different style, but they don't have that maintenance cost. So their capital starts up at a higher cost, but then it just sort of goes like this, instead of every 15 years when you repaint the tank.
Over 50 or 60 years, I looked at that chart. Weren't they approximately the same cost over that period of lifespan?
There was one option that was relatively high,
Oh, okay.
and that's pumping. And I don't think that's a good option, but I put it in there anyway.
I don't know.
Yeah, that would be a ground tank.
Right.
Well, you could hide it. I was trying to put in something that might be more aesthetically pleasing, but now you're painting it and replacing pumps. And it's not what I would think is the right place that you're gonna go. But anyway, sorry. And
Oh, thank you very much.
the point is, the type of style of tank is not the critical item. The budgets do end up very similar, so the number in here is appropriate to develop the rates for, and it would have to be an additional process to choose the path you go in.
So Danielle and then Tom.
Yeah, so public input that they look for in terms of public finance and water infrastructure is more like a public hearing, right? It's not, you reach out and talk to everybody, but there's not a vote.
But there's definitely a documentation and requirement
Right,
and
so you
comments.
document that you had a hearing and talked to.
And comments that were received
Right,
here,
comments.
yeah.
My thing is that I just want to go back to the beginning when Joel talked about the fire department and having issues with not having sufficient amount of water. The tower we have now gives us about 60 minutes worth of firefighting water. That's providing the mains don't break on us while we're doing it, because last week, Jim knows, Jim was there, we just went to fill up a truck to put out a brush fire, and the main ruptured. If that had been an actual live structure fire going, that would have been an issue. The 4 corners in the village, 150,000 gallons of water is probably just a drop in the bucket to put out if the 4 corners decided to go up. Those buildings are very old, they've had a lot of issues with them, and we've been really fortunate as a firefighting company that they haven't gone up. The bigger the tank, the better. I'm not a fan of the tank being way up in the sky, because people have a habit of climbing up those towers, and if somebody gets hurt up there, as far as I'm concerned, they can stay there. I mean, we don't have anybody that's willing, I don't think, that's going to go climb in those towers and get somebody off. That's the stuff you got to look at. You got to look at it on our side too. You know, we don't want to put our guys in danger to overpass to those things. So, unless you're going to electrify it, I always say electrify it. So this way they don't touch it.
And just so you know, it's not Santa Fe, it's the one across the street, and then the Masonic Lodge, that's gigantic.
That whole corner.
Those are the two we use because they're the biggest square footage of fire load. So those two structures, and I encourage you to look at we could do two different NFPA methods for calculating the fire flow, but those are the two test structures they were two different types of construction, non-combustible and wood frame.
All wood buildings,
Yeah.
all 4 corners, except for Marty's, where
So-
it's brick.
So just if you're curious from a fire perspective,
Yeah.
you can take a look at the test cases and how we develop those fire flows.
Yeah.
I know it's in blocks, I think, but if we adopt you and go with this plan,
She's right, yeah.
where do our workers stand? Where are their jobs?
That's something that we've had some discussion with the village on, but very preliminary of, what are the options, what are the issues that arise. I think part of it is a discussion for the village to have about what they would choose to do. Would the village want to absorb those DPW staff for other remaining functions? Because you do have, I don't know if I can come up with the full list, but the water system, the sewer system, the roads, the storm drains, the sidewalks, all of the buildings that the village owns, all the park property that the village owns. Am I leaving anything off the list of everything that you do with 3 people?
Trash.
Trash, the waterfront.
Compost.
So, there's certainly work to be done. But how that would impact on the village's budget is something that the village needs to look at. Whether there would be an opportunity for transfer of staff, if staff were interested, is something that we could talk about. We did that with one system we took over where it was a staffed water treatment plant, and those people became our employees and continued to run the system. So it's an important issue to be addressed in the process. It wasn't one I think that anybody felt was prepared or appropriate to go into the details in this initial evaluation
We
phase.
discussed a number of models, right? And so that would be, those details would be hammered out in the transfer agreement? So,
Or as part of the village's decision on
Right.
all of the impacts on the.
I can't tell you, after sort of dealing with late night noise, if I had one thing I could do for the village of Tivoli, it's get about 3 more DPW. Every day, I find Jimmy and the guys and I'm like, this is the list, sorry, and we could absolutely find full-time gainful employment for them, even if they're not doing water and sewer. We've got plenty of other things around here that need attention.
And they would be testing water anymore.
Right, all the water and sewer would be handled by the water authority, but, our current personnel, I've got plenty for them to do, and they're great. I love working with them. I don't want to go anywhere. Karen?
One more question, I think probably Aaron. You had a plan that was immediate, 5 years, 10 years. This stops at 5 years. Are there other projects beyond this that we're not addressing right now? And are they big money?
Definitely, we hit the largest thing for the water in that 5 mark, which is out the window. The water tower is without a doubt the largest ticket item. The wastewater, none of the other phases have as much in it as the 0 to 5 phase. As Bridget acknowledged in the reports and in her report, we acknowledge how rates could change over time. The issue is, and it's correct, as we get further away, the reliability liability of when we actually need to do those projects become lesser, because we can look at something and say, okay, this looks about somewhere in your 10-year time frame, you should be doing this. So we felt it's not as 100%, so looking at that 0 to 5 is probably the best decision-making numbers, but I encourage you to take a look and see how we've incorporated the other items for a planning standpoint.
I know you mentioned about the well capacity,
Yes.
and I'm assuming that somewhere down the line, where that's going to be needed to be addressed. And I know what we've been through with wells. And do we get the trial and error? Do we have to pay for all that? What we've been through with, if we give it over to GIFSI, to Waterworks? I mean, it has not been easy finding a well.
I mean, I don't know if this is the place to go into this discussion. You still don't have it's an easement. You don't have that property for your most critical well.
Right.
I would love nothing more. There's grant funding right now for source water land acquisition, just saying. We've all been at battling conferences of grant seminars. Right now, I was down in Newburgh yesterday. These two were at a conference today. It is grant season, and I saw, grants for land acquisition for source water protection, and I thought, I wonder if that could be valuable for Tivoli. So,
We pay rent right now.
Yeah,
Our best wells,
I know.
every month.
yes.
And it went up again. And would you sell? But
Yeah, so I mean, we can't, this is not but that is 100% an issue which is something that should be on your minds regardless of who.
Well, it's on my mind because if we give up our water system, we have no say in any of this, and their corporation will make those decisions. And we have to abide by that because we don't have any say, right? It's not our concern anymore.
So, again, as you said, yes, you don't vote for us, you don't elect us. I think there is still accessibility and accountability, but I would also suggest that what you really want is you want an adequate water supply, you want sufficient quantity at a reasonable price. So we have 18 water systems. There's a large number of them that are well-based systems. There are 5 of those systems in the time I've been with the authority that we've owned this, where we have done well redevelopment projects, where we have investigated reduced capacity, reduced production capacity of wells to determine what's causing the problem, what the best approach is. Sometimes it's not the well itself, it's the pump in the well that has to be replaced. In one instance, it turned out that there was an iron bacteria that was developing within the well that was clogging the well and reducing the capacity. We have done fracking, and I know it's a bad word, but fracking is also, other than a means of getting oil out of the ground, fracking is a way that can be done just with water without chemicals to open up the pore spaces, the veins within the ground surrounding a well to increase the flow of the water to that well. So it's absolutely an issue that gets addressed with water systems. And again, I would say what's really most important is not the input in the decision, it's that you know what the things are that you can do to create additional well capacity at the least cost possible, so that people are getting the reliability with as little impact on their costs as possible.
And I would just add the question of source, and do we have enough water? As Erin mentioned early in her presentation, that's something that needs to be looked at. It was outside the scope of this evaluation, and that's going to be an issue regardless of who owns it. So, you know, if maybe Tivoli grows or Tivoli says, okay, it's time to make sure we have a little more water, either we're going to take that on, us, or them. It's still, you know, whoever owns it's going to own the same product, own the same thing.
And I just want to clarify, there is, you know, day-to-day operations, and then there's Department of Health regulations. So what I'm citing is the Department of Health regulation, which is that you need to be able to have your capacity with your largest well out of service. And so, and that's a very specific number that you have to meet, and that you were with the lower assumptions, a few gallons per minute outside of. If we go with the other assumption, you were above it. So the question is, really, what is the capacity of that well, and are you in a gray zone or not? That, to me, the bigger issue is, boy, it'd be great if you owned whoever owned the well and not leased it. That's definitely, as Joel said, beyond the scope of what we can evaluate, or any value, frankly, on that topic that I can bring. So.
Danielle?
Well, I was late, so I apologize if you already addressed this. But if you guys, if the village was going to do it, I mean, you wouldn't honestly just be a bunch of you guys just doing it. I mean, wouldn't you hire a project consultant and, you know, I mean, you have an engineer on staff. I don't know if you have a specific one for this.
Well, I would imagine for most projects, like, you know, say we're gonna replace the water tower. We're gonna create an RFP and we're gonna put it out, and engineers are gonna bid on it, and, you know, so each piece of this, we would have to manage each of those projects. But yeah, I mean, we wouldn't do it.
But most of the infrastructure is going to be replaced in kind, right? I wasn't here for that part. But the lines and everything, you're not getting new easements for individual property owners. It's silly.
There is some easement issues, but nothing
With the
new.
wells.
Yes.
With the wells,
But-
but not the individual property or, you know.
None of the
households.
recommendations at this point include any additional properties or properties that aren't village properties.
One more question, then I want to say something, because people are trickling out and have something important to say.
How many wells does the village actually own on village land?
Village land?
None, right?
Oh, no.
Two.
Two. So the rest of
It's
them are all,
midnight,
somebody else owns it.
all pots.
All
pots.
They're all night pots and pots.
Pots,
The
east,
ball
west.
lot.
That's a ball lot.
I think it's only Woodmark.
Right,
Only
just-
the
The only
two
one that's not is
Woodmark.
Right.
Only the two
Yeah.
Woodmark.
What's the answer? How many do we own and how many are we?
The only one that you don't own is Trent.
I think, yeah, 8 wells, so 2 no, so 6 yes.
6 we own the land, 2 we lease.
Six, we
It's
own
only
the land, we own the land on
Woodmark.
6.
Yes.
Or, but there are 2, or there's 2 Woodmark wells? One Woodmark.
2 Woodmark wells.
Well, all right, so what I want to say, because we've already gone over 2 hours, is thank you for toughing it out, and even people who left, I'm glad they were here. We just had a little huddle. We would like to announce now the next meeting on this topic to continue the conversation. It's going to be Thursday again, June 22nd, 7 p.m. back here. And I hope that if you haven't dived into these reports, you will do so. And most importantly, we need your help to get everyone outside this building, all our friends and neighbors, to start paying attention to this. Because it's that important. This is obviously a huge and existential choice for Tivoli. Certainly not the choice to fix things, but which way we want to go on transfer or ownership. That's big. We want everyone involved, and if everyone here can go home and make sure that 4 other people come on June 22nd at 7 p.m., I think we all see the value in that, right? So please help us out. If there are any other questions, we can take another 2, or we'll continue. These folks probably won't be here on that day, but we know where they are. We have their numbers. We can, gather more questions and ask them. So right now, let's just thank them for being here and all the work that they're doing. Okay, thanks a lot, folks. So let's continue this conversation. Thank you.
Did the chief?